Cindy, we've begun recording, is that correct? Great. And so as we get to 9 o'clock, starting to see folks come on here.
Yes, we are live streaming and recording.
Okay, great, thank you.
April and Mandy, I have made you co-hosts, so if you want to share your screen for a presentation.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We're just getting everybody on here. Looks like we have the full council's tuned in. We've got our city clerk, we've got our city manager. Is our city attorney joining us this morning?
I'm not certain. I don't think so, though.
Okay. Well, very well. It's 9 o'clock. It looks like we've got the council here, and we'll get started here. This is the City of St. Helena Special City Council meeting, Tuesday, May 31st, 2022. And Cindy, do you have some remote access instructions for us, please?
Just one moment. Let me share my screen. Folks can participate remotely by dialing in 669-900-6833. At the prompt, you'd enter the meeting ID, which is 813-0749-4296. You would press the pound key, and then during public comment, you can unmute yourself by pressing *9.
Great, thank you. And I'll remind folks that simultaneous Spanish interpretation services during meetings can be scheduled upon request. To ensure interpreters are available, requests must be made at least 72 hours in advance by calling the office of the city clerk at 707-968-2640 or emailing cityclerk@cityofsthelena.org. We'll move into our meeting. We'll have our roll call, please.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Here. Good morning.
Councilmember Chateau?
Here.
Councilmember Hall?
Here.
And Councilmember Hardy?
Here.
Very well. So if I don't see it on the agenda, but if we do the pledge here, if folks mute their mics, we'll just get through the pledge here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And looking back on Memorial Day with thanks as well. With that, we'll move to the adoption of the agenda, and I'll look to our city clerk to see if there are any changes in today's agenda.
There are. So we are going to take some items out of order. We're going to start with item 6.1, then move to 6.3, and then 6.2.
Okay, so with those changes outlined, is there a motion from the council for adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Chateau?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Hall?
Yes, but do you mean 5-3, 5-2, 5-1?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. With that, we'll move down to public comment. This is under California law. Public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda only. Therefore, public comment will take place during consideration of the item. Each person's comments shall be limited to 4 minutes. So we'll open public comment on each of the items. And with that, I will turn this over to Dr. Mitz, our Administrative Services Director, to get us into the items. Or if our city
Thank you
manager,
very
Mr. McCann.
I will defer over to City Manager McCann for this moment. If he had any opening
Great, thank
words.
you. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to find the time to do this. We've had some extra special demands on council time over the last couple of weeks, so appreciate everybody arranging their schedule. And as our city clerk said, we are going to move the agenda around a little bit. We thought it would make more sense to talk about the long-range financial forecast, then talk about the capital improvement program, and then follow up with the actual budget information. We thought that made more sense. A lot of this does relate to each other, so it's a little bit fluid. One thing influences the other. But to get started, just a couple of acknowledgements. One, I really want to thank the staff for their good work over the last a couple of months as we've started with a thought and then refined that into initial projections, got some feedback from you all, and came back and really pushed hard to make budget numbers, capital improvement programs make more sense. I want to thank April and Mandy in particular. They've done a tremendous amount of work, including over the weekend and including just yesterday and last night. So this is a fresh living document, and they've done a tremendous amount of work. Also, Mark and Eric and Martine and others in our Public Works Department really pushed hard to improve what we were going to be presenting to you in just a bit. Also want to thank the City Council. You all have been deeply invested in our budget, in our infrastructure. You've established very clear and good goals, which are guiding us as we move through this. I want to thank the council for your seriousness and your commitment to this good effort. You're going to hear from April and Mandy and others in a bit about our thoughts about where we are and where we should go. I think the staff has done a very good job in trying to reconcile lots and lots of demands with limited and finite resources. We're going to present ideas that I think satisfy that for the moment. They acknowledge that we've got demands greatly in excess of our capabilities. We're trying to lay out realistically that condition in the long-range financial forecast. There's lots of assumptions there, and there are realistic assumptions, and then there are some assumptions that can be very demanding to try to address. Some of those go to some of the unknowns that we have in front of us, inflation, potential demands that we don't foresee. But those are all things that we have to eventually factor into financial needs, and that goes into the longer-term financial planning effort that we're suggesting that we need to undertake. So we have a forecast looking at the immediate future with some assumptions, but that leads us into a much longer commitment that we'll be talking about in coming months about planning. And that is where we will have to strategically look at our ability to address the needs that we know are coming our way. And those will be decisions that the council will have to make that will be long-term and will be extremely important for the community. So I think we've got a good a series of presentations to provide to you. I'll just say that this is putting us in a position to move forward in the immediate future, the coming fiscal year. And it is, in my mind, imperative that the council address our immediate needs so we can continue with our services and programs and infrastructure repair, but also concurrently very aggressively pursue a more sustainable financial condition for the city so that we can continue to provide these services into the future. And that's that planning effort that we'll talk about and we'll look forward to commencing. So with that, April, can you walk us through the good work that you and Mandy have done, please?
Great. Thank you very much. And echo City Manager McCann, thank you so much for taking time out of your day today just to be able to listen and hear what we have going on for the future. So we have our long-range financial forecast, which is what we're starting out with. Let me get to the right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen, correct? Looking for a thumbs up from.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Everything's squared away here. So the long-range financial forecast, or what I usually call designated as the LRF, it does provide current and long-range financial assessment of just the general fund only. What we do is we look at our revenues, our expenditures, what the estimated fund balance is, what the emergency reserves or your cash position looks like. And it is important to notice that this is for illustrative purposes only. We do update this every year, just dependent on the changing conditions of the economy. The objective of the long-range financial forecast is to provide an early financial assessment of where we're looking at for 10 years out, identify any significant issues that need to be addressed. As stated before, we do update this annually, and it illustrates the trends over the next 10 years. The long-range financial forecast that was presented for this fiscal year, the assumptions that it makes is it utilizes the draft 22-23 revenue and expenses. It utilizes moderate revenue and expense increases over the years. And those, if you look in the full details of the document, you'll actually see what those projections are. It does utilize the infrastructure task force calculations for hotel revenues, and it does not factor into a recession. So there is word right now that we might enter into a recession as early as next year. So just know that the assumptions that were made for this 10-year forecast do not factor into recession. The other thing for expenses, it is important to know that we did break down expenses a little further. So we did forecast a 5% increase in expenses for every line item except for maintenance, which we only did a 1% increase. And then for capital, we did a moderate 2% increase. For all other categories, being salary and benefits, services, supplies, we did forecast a 5% escalator. There are risks to the long-range financial forecast. Some of those are the volatile economy. With everything going on in the world right now, we know that things can change in a heartbeat, and we saw that in COVID, and we're also seeing that with inflation right now. It does not take, or other risks that we have to consider is state takeaway and borrowing. So if the state does decide that they want to rechange some of the formulas for how cities get allocated money, that is a risk that we have to take into consideration. Unfunded liability pension costs. So depending on what the rate of return is in future years, that could definitely affect how much that we're paying out in salary and benefits. Compensation or staffing increases is a risk. Fire department hybrid model. As this council is aware, as well as the public, over the past couple of years, we have seen a shift in our fire department going from a primarily hourly employees to now we have 6 full-time firefighters and a full-time fire chief. So that is a risk. We do still depend on the hybrid model for the fire department, which includes utilization of part-time employees. So that is something with, if part-timers aren't available, that is a risk that could ultimately cost additional money in future years. Health premiums, we do build in a 5% increase in health premiums for the life of the long-range financial forecast. But as we know, that can actually fluctuate to greater than 5%. Asset recapitalization, there is the long-range financial forecast starts projecting additional $1 million starting in fiscal year 24. That does not take into consideration any emergency repairs that have to be done. And there's no major new one-time expenses that are included in the long-range financial forecast. And then storm drain improvements and repairs starting in fiscal year 24. I said $1 million for asset recapitalization. It's split 50-50 between asset recapitalization and storm drains. So there are 4 scenarios that were presented in the long-range financial forecast. And again, this is more just to get an idea of what economic factors can drive what our future forecasts look like. The first forecast is a baseline, and that does include Farmstead Hotel with revenue starting in fiscal year 26-27. That might, realistically, Farmstead could go online a year before that, but we just wanted to be very conservative in our forecast. But we are showing that they would be in this forecast starting in fiscal year 27. Scenario 2 is a baseline plus adds a second hotel in fiscal year 28. And again, both of these scenarios using the infrastructure task force calculations. Scenario 3, that's where we actually start in adding storm drains and civic improvements starting in fiscal year 24, which adds $1 million. And so the scenario 3 is the baseline with just Farmstead, and then adding in those capital improvements. And then the last scenario that we did is the scenario number 2, which takes 2 hotels and then adds in the civic infrastructure. So here's a baseline for what scenario 1 looks like. So again, this just takes what our forecast is for the 10-year projections for our revenues. It adds Farmstead in as the baseline. So here we see increased sales tax and TOT starting in fiscal year 27. And remember, with Farmstead, we do have a development agreement in place with them. Farmstead is taking care and basically paying for the construction of significant storm drain as well as street and road repairs that are directly tied to that project as well. So the city does have a cost share. So when you look at the projections here for your TOT, we do have a cost share with them. So this takes into account the cost share. And then you'll see your property tax starts in fiscal year 28. And so here you can see for the first couple of years, based on the projections that we have, we are dipping into use of fund balance right here. But you can see that we are maintaining a healthy financial position. And if you look at your unassigned net position here at the bottom, so we do have some available funding, particularly I would say more for your one-time expenditures. But here you can see we're looking at a pretty decent, a healthy financial position going into scenario 1. If you look at scenario 2, so this adds a second hotel going online in fiscal year 29. Here you can see where your reserves are showing even healthier. Again, but this does not take into account any type of asset recapitalization or any major CIP projects. Scenario 3, this is where we start adding civic and storm drain and investment improvements. So here you can see where we're actually starting to dip more into using cash balances over the years until Farmstead goes online. But again, we never once under this scenario actually go where we're showing revenues over expenses. So we're dipping into cash balance. And in this scenario, you can see where your reserves, as you're continually dipping into cash balance, you see your reserves are dipping down into where we end up right here at 17%, which is much lower than the 30% city council reserve policy. Scenario 4, this adds a second hotel in here. And so you see where that second revenue stream does definitely bring our cash reserves into a much better balance. The next chart, which is also provided in the long-range financial forecast, this just provides a summary of where you're looking at for your baseline for your net position as compared to your percentage of cash reserves. So you can see how much it differentiates when you're looking out to the 10-year mark in fiscal year 32. So the first scenario is showing Farmstead only. The second scenario is showing a second hotel added. The third scenario is just the baseline plus $1 million in capital improvements. So that's when you see it really dipping down. And then the fourth scenario is taking the 2 hotels and then adding in some capital, some improvements, $1 million in the capital improvements each year. So next steps, as we can see, I want to go back to the slide. As you can see, if we do nothing, if we are looking right now at the scenario, we have Farmstead online, which we know they're in the process right now. Scenario 3 is basically doing nothing but trying to add $1 million in capital assets and asset recapitalization. If we do nothing, we can see how quickly our reserves are diminishing into reserve levels that really are not sustainable. So the next steps, what staff is looking at for next year is really working on developing a long-range financial plan. So the first step is looking at the long-range financial forecast. As we see, if we do nothing whatsoever, we are using reserves year over year after year, which is not sustainable. So what we want to do next is look at a long-range financial plan. So what that's really intended to do is manage the city's financial integrity, including through a recession, while maintaining high levels of service and provide funding towards critical infrastructure. It will assist in aligning financial capacity with long-term service objectives. And it will also address key financial strategy areas. So some ways in doing this is not an all-inclusive list, but just some ways is one, we need to ensure that we have adequate funding for designated services. We also need to manage our ongoing operating expenditures, knowing that right now expenses are going up. We know that cost of goods are going up. And right now, even what we have built in the long-range financial forecast is 5% for some of the major category areas, which if you look at the CPI for this fiscal year, it's definitely below. So we know we need to constantly be monitoring that. We also know that a long-range financial plan will provide for pension and other long-term obligations. We also want to make sure a plan provides for contingencies. We need the plan to provide for capital improvements, and we also need this plan moving forward to maintain sufficient cash flow. Because again, if we look at scenario 3, which is where we're at right now, adding a modest $1 million a year in capital improvements, we can definitely see where the cash flows over the long term is not sustainable. Some other considerations why we move forward in this long-range financial plan, we'll be looking overall at staffing and employment costs. We know that those are going up. Once we start adding positions, those are ongoing costs of the city, both in salaries, but also in benefits. And and then also if you look at the long-term pension costs. One of the things that we do want to maybe look at going forward to the long-range financial plan is doing a consideration of a 2-year operating budget cycle. So that way it will allow for staff to continually to provide updates to the city council and the community over that 2-year period, but it also frees up some staff capacity to really focus in on that plan and working on other objectives to make sure that we're financially sustainable. Looking at the plan for consideration is looking at efficiencies achieved by shared service agreements, as well as potential public-private partnerships. Over the past couple of years, we have looked at public-private partnerships through some great work that was done by Cosmont, but we have not moved forward with any of those. So that's something that a long-range financial plan can really help us hone in on those efforts. Some other things that the long-range financial plan can look at is revenue increases, which are including but not limited to. Do we want to look at increasing the TOT even further? Looking at an additional increase in sales tax, business license tax, which we have not increased as long as I've been here, which is 7.5 years. And Mandy can attribute, she's been here even longer, and we've never actually looked at increasing business license taxes. Potentially looking at a new tax measure. Right now, we do have the GO bond on the ballot, Measure H, which is a $19.5 million bond, which would be utilized if it is passed to address some more immediate needs for storm drain water and wastewater projects. We might want to look at increasing the fees for service, which right now we do have a pending development impact fee study, as well as a user fee study, which we're just about wrapped up with. So that should go online hopefully in the next year. Also looking at the sale of city-owned property, especially with staff moving and the relocation of City Hall and the police department over to the Napa Valley College site. It does free up the property down on Main Street. The other thing that's not included in this list, but definitely to be mindful of, is further economic development. What are some other opportunities that are within the city that we can actually start capitalizing on sooner rather than later. So that is something that's all going to be taken into consideration for the upcoming year when we work on really solidifying this long-range financial plan. The next steps for the long-range financial plan is we do anticipate the formation of an ad hoc committee, which that's something that we'll be working with staff as well as potentially at least one council liaison to really put together a solid plan that makes sense for the St. Helena community. When it's completed, the long-range financial plan is intended to establish a new way forward for the continued fiscal health of the city. So again, that is a very brief overview of the, I think it was about a 22-page report for the long-range financial forecast that was put before the City Council and published. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions, as well as City Manager McCann or Assistant Admin Services Director Mandy Kellogg. And thank you.
Thank you. Any initial questions or input from council? I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Hi, thank you. I just have one quick question. Why was maintenance only added in as a 1% increase when the others were a higher percentage for anticipated future expenses?
What we looked at when we looked at future expenses going out for extrapolating what it was going to look like, we looked at both the 3-year pre-COVID numbers, also looked at the 20-year average and the 10-year average of what we spent. So for maintenance and for asset recapitalization, it was very, very modest. And so those were the same percentages that we applied to the long-range financial forecast. In developing the long-range financial plan, it is something that we can continually update the long-range financial forecast. It is a living, breathing document. So if we want to run different scenarios, it's easy enough for us to do that as staff.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. Ms. Mitz, thank you very much. Following on Member Shudo's question about maintenance, if you look back over the past 3 or 4 years and look at past run rates, those are unrealistic simply because the city was under pressure, and we made a decision to hold expenses, to cap expenses, not to let them run and address what needs to be addressed, but to cap them. Just as we've done this year, I believe, with our annual budget, right? Department directors were explicitly told no increases. So we can't look back on run rates. We have to look at what's reasonable going forward. So even the 1% moving up to 5% on maintenance, I think is very, very low. We know right now today, inflation is almost 9%. It's double the 5%. So it would be great to see in these forecasts numbers that tie back to what we currently understand right now today. Thank you.
Additional council comment, input? I've got a couple of questions. In the scenario 3 that you ran, so does that not include Farmstead?
Scenario 3 is Farmstead. So scenario 3 is the baseline, which includes Farmstead, and then adding $1 million in storm drain and asset CIP projects. So it does include Farmstead, and you can even see with Farmstead, if you put in $1 million a year, you can see where the reserves start dipping down.
Okay, so what was the difference then between scenario 1 and scenario 3?
The difference between scenario 1 and scenario 3 is adding $1 million of capital improvements. Scenario 1, as Councilmember Hall did state, it does not go back to even pre-Great Recession levels. It is status quo. We don't have a lot of extra bells and whistles that are being added. We're buying a lot of duct tape to fix things. And so I do appreciate the comments from Councilmember Hall where it's not realistic to keep going on that trajectory.
Thank you. So then moving to the business license tax, has there been any rough analysis of how that may increase revenue?
At this point, we have not done any rough analysis. We have over the years talk if we do bring this, because it is a tax, so it does have to be brought before the voters, but maybe changing the way we do it and do it based off of income of the particular business. Right now, it's based off of the number of employees, and I believe that the type of business and number of employees, and I'll get confirmation from Mandy on this. But one of the other areas that we're looking at potentially changing business license tax is actually based on revenues.
Okay, thank you. And so in terms of exploring that, that would take some analysis to get a general idea of what that might bring in, but that may be a pre-project.
Correct.
Okay, I've got one more question, but I can defer to Councilmember Hall if you've got something to interject on that.
Go ahead, Mayor.
So in looking at this model, this long-range forecast, one of the aspects of it, I think that, we've since been through pandemic, fires, et cetera, is what does diversification of our economy look like? You mentioned at the end of the presentation, what else can we do? So in terms of looking at perhaps other sectors, we heard last year or 2 years ago in the middle of the pandemic through the county, there was a man named Robert Eiler, who's a professor at Sonoma State, had done a study for the city of Healdsburg and was also talking with the county about what does it look like to look at other sectors, tech, medical, light industrial, education, things like that. So hopefully, as we think about this and we think about what we can do moving forward, perhaps those additional things we can do, as well as visitation, the diversification aspect also may have social equity aspects that would sort of double track us on those social equity issues as well. So in terms of overall opportunity for revenue and economy, how would you suggest moving forward a conversation of what else may be available from after what we've learned from the pandemic and fires?
That is something that I would definitely want to roll into the long-range financial plan, is not working in tunnel vision. I think for so long with local governments, it was you have your main revenue sources, and we are very fortunate in St. Helena that we have sales, TOT, and property tax. That accounts for about 90% of our total general fund revenues, and they are pretty equally divided between 30%, 30%, and 30%. So while we did take a substantial hit during the pandemic, primarily to TOT, we did not see a drop in our sales, or not see a drop in our sales tax or a drop in our property taxes. So for us, we have a really good, strong foundation of what our base general fund resources are. There are a lot more articles and research, and I have been following Dr. Eiler for a couple of years now, just to see what his take is on the economy. And I do turn to a lot of his reports. The other thing too is recently GFOA has come out with a 2-part series that specifically addresses what are other revenue sources for local businesses and what are the other things that you can look at. And it does, in their reports, they actually do talk about addressing equity and the inequities in where your different revenue sources are. So for this point going forward, I would like to wrap that in with the long-range financial plan and working with that ad hoc committee to really, see what else is out there that maybe we haven't thought of here in St. Helena.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hall and Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments. One, I think the idea of looking at other ways of diversifying our economy is just fine. That tends to be a very long-term, far off, long-term investment. And we have streets and water problems and lighting problems and storm drain problems that need immediate attention today. So the primary sources of revenue today are very few put before us because we're very limited on our options. So I think it's a good idea in our long-term financial plan, April, as you said, to consider things like that. But I think we all need to keep in mind those are very, very long-term investments, and we're not likely to see any immediate revenue back on any of it. The second thing is on your baseline 3, or not your baseline, but scenario 3, does it include investments in staff that we already know about? So I think all of these keep our 5 frozen positions still frozen throughout. So I'm wondering, maybe it'd be nice to show freeing up some of those over the first 1, 2, 3 years, as well as the negotiations happening with our bargaining units today. What are some likely scenarios that are going to come out of that? And then third, tied to investing in staff, is the CalPERS data represented here reflective of how you feel in your gut? In other words, we know that we're going to get some data from CalPERS next September, but if we already know and can anticipate that we're going to that their costs are going to go up because of COVID losses, we should just bake that into our baseline as here's the probability of this occurring. How much is that? How does it impact us? We know it's on the way. So I think that type of reflection would be great in here. Are those things included in here today?
The 5 frozen positions are not included in the baseline scenario. For these positions, it's approximately, if you add all of them together, it's about $600,000. So we can easily kind of work that way in the analysis. As far as PERS contributions, it's based off of the numbers that we receive from our I can never say that word. The person that crunches all those fancy numbers. Right. But we do need to update those because obviously we know PERS had some, their returns weren't as great as what they expected. So we know we do need to update that. So every time that we have the new numbers run, we can definitely plug it right into the scenario.
Okay, thank you very much. And lastly, you had a note in here about asset recapitalization in scenario 3 and the purpose for that. You indicated that we're depreciating our assets at $1.3 million a year. Is that based on the report that was done 4 or 5 years ago with basically a subset of assets? Are those civic buildings? Basically, is that $40 million worth of civic buildings?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so there's nothing here, and obviously it's the general fund, it's not the water enterprise, but there's nothing here that reflects the rest of our fixed assets.
Correct. Yeah, this is just the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Councilmember Hardy, then open it for public comment.
Thanks. I think it's really important that we keep clear in our thoughts and our conversation that there are important economic sectors that exist or could expand that don't really contribute much to the municipal revenue, because as April explained, property tax, sales tax, and TOT are most of the revenue received. And at present, for example, the service sector, except to the extent that converting an existing use to a service use increases the property value, it doesn't generate any revenue for the city at all. We don't collect any revenue when someone visits the doctor or the accountant or the lawyer. We don't collect any revenue. We wouldn't necessarily collect any revenue from any kind of industrial, light industrial, or other enterprise that doesn't actually conduct retail sales from which we collect sales tax. So economic diversification may have wonderful and important potential to increase the resilience and strengthen the local economy, but we got to remember it can do all that without doing anything for our fiscal challenges. So part of what we're contending with is an archaic tax structure that is not very well related to the 21st century economy. And one thing that comes to my mind when from time to time we're confronted with the rather impoverished state of the public fisc here, and the very obvious wealth in the community is that we don't collect any income tax. We don't get any revenue just because the community is wealthy. Unlike the state of California, we've just heard a possibility of doing that probably in a modest way through tying business licenses to income. But it takes something like a change in our tax structure to actually integrate some of these other sectors of the economy into the municipal revenue. So I think we really need to be clear about these relationships when we broaden the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll look now to our public to see if there's any public comment.
There are no raised hands.
No raised hands. Okay, we'll bring it back to the council. We'll see if there's any, or if there are any final comments or input here on the long-range financial forecast. Seeing Councilmember Hall and City Manager McCann.
Thank you. Mr. McCann, you want to start or?
No, why don't you go ahead, and then
Okay.
I'll just offer a couple of comments. I was going to actually comment on a few things that you have said, so why don't you go ahead, please?
Thank you. I was just going to say I would like to see a refresh on the LRF. Scenario 3 is would be the starting point, I guess. And if my view of the LRF is that this is where we, as a group, play with scenarios. What's realistic and what isn't. This is the place where we should be saying, here's what we need to do to provide the services to our community that we want or that we're supposed to deliver, and then determine at some point if there's a gap, if there's problems, how do we do that? And then the long range plan would help close that gap in very clear, measured ways. So the LRF, Ms. Mitz, you were spot on. Exactly, hit the nail on the head when you said, if you look at scenario 3 and there's no change, it's not sustainable. The pictures, as you know, I think it's much, much worse than even presented in scenario 3. It's definitely not sustainable. Therefore, the LRF should not begin from that starting point. The LRF should be, here's the facts of the matter today. Here's what's happening in the economy today. Here's what we already know. And all of that should be based in here. Here's how fast our infrastructure expense is climbing. Here's what we're not doing about it. All of that should be included in here. And then that should be a wake-up call to us that shows we're already deeply in the red. But we have staff that we have to bring back on board. We have staff that we have to pay. We have other ongoing costs that are baked into our uncontrollable expenses here. So all of that, I think, should be part of the LRF. That's the whole point of the LRF, is to look at it in a realistic way. And then the plan would be how to close those gaps that we see. I mean, that's my thought. So I'd love to see a refresh just on scenario 3 that includes realistic inflators, escalators. We're in effect, in a recession. So however you define it, I think you should allow for some reduced expenditure in the economy mapped with higher costs. And that's not included here. So let's not start with an unrealistic starting point. Let's bake everything in that we know. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing City Manager McCann.
Great. Thank you for all those comments. I do think it is helpful to lay out different scenarios in the forecast. And I think that the input from Mr. Hall is right on to maybe adjust the assumptions to better reflect some of those exposures that we see. The next logical step, once one factors in some of the negatives, is also to be inclined to factor in the positives. The positives, are some things within City Council's reach and ability to address. Some are farther and beyond and require cooperation and support from our electorate. So the comments that Councilmember Hardy offered about business license fees, those require a vote of the populace. And so there's a need to explain that, whether it's TOT or sales tax or transfer tax. They all have different mechanisms, but those are all, in my view, levers, tools that are at the disposal of the City Council. Similarly, the potential that development has or redevelopment has. And so you can see in the scenarios the benefit that we all anticipate from the construction of the hotel in conjunction with Farmstead is fantastic. That can be replicated if that's the desire of the community and of the council. There are many properties in the community that have development potential, and that development, if done at the right scale and with the proper focus, can be very beneficial both to the community from a vibrancy and vitality standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. So those are all elements that I think we should address. We can certainly refresh the LRF to add some additional assumptions relative to costs and exposures and liabilities. I don't think we would venture into, well, what if we raise the TOT by this, or what if we had a different project come forward? Those are exercises that I think we should really let the long-range financial plan and that process play out. I think to lay out in the LRF the scenarios of the potential exposures is a good thing, and then that will give us a very clear platform from which to jump into the planning effort. So I see Mr. Doring, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. I see Vice Mayor Doring.
Thank you. All good comments. I do tend to agree with Councilmember Hall with respect to how this is presented. I think it's important for us to understand that this is a communication tool, not only for our public, but for us to kind of get a sense of what the worst case scenarios are. The word scenario is a problematic word. I understand that that's probably how they're typically laid out. Some would construe that as an option. And I think that's maybe a concern that Mr. Hall has. Scenario number one, scenario two, those are, in my view, not even options. I mean, scenario three is barely an option, and obviously it's got more data that needs to be built into it. So I think we have to be, either in the narrative or somewhere, we have to be very explicit and transparent with our public that some of these are really not realistic options that we would necessarily take. And so we need to be careful when we say scenario to the public. And that's, scenario one is sort of already built in. That's already happening essentially. In a way, it's almost like, why is it there? Is my thought. And even number two, why is it there? Number three and number four are getting closer to it, but they're still missing data. So those would be my comments on that. I am concerned that these have to be realistic tools, and we need more data. So I agree with Mr. McCann and Mr. Hall in that regard. And the plan obviously will come and help sort of explain what our responses are to these potential scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of those comments so far very much. I just wanted to put out there that seeing all of the scenarios has helped me because it tells the story about how doing nothing isn't working. And that's important for me to see, and I think for others as well. So I appreciate the work for that one. And I love all of the feedback on how to make it even better.
Thank you. Seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. And thank you, Vice Mayor. I also like the scenarios, and I think For some folks, the more scenarios, the more confusing things get. And I was just thinking maybe one way to look at our scenarios going forward is to sort of say, here's one or two likely things that that we as a council might have control over, such as development approvals or tax rates, et cetera. That can be a scenario. And we can be more aggressive or less aggressive there. Another sort of option or scenario on either one of those could be, here's the macroeconomic framework that we're operating within, right? Here's what do we really believe, what's the impact of a recession on inflation, on employment, on job growth, et cetera. And those can be sort of an optional way of how bad do we think the macroeconomy can get? How good is it? Is it going to be a soft landing or not? And so how long will it take to recover? Should our revenue numbers be growing at a certain number here or up here, right? Regardless of the decisions that we're making here, that we have control over. So that might be another way of flexing the different scenarios to make it a little bit clearer. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we've got input on our long-range financial forecast. And if there's no additional input, why don't we go back to Mr. McCann and Dr. Mitz to look at how we move into our next item, which is the review of the 5-year capital improvement program for fiscal years 2022 to 23 and 2026 to 27.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the input on the financial forecast. I think those are very, very helpful for us. We will definitely take that input and make some further revision, and we'll have some conversation with you all individually before we do that to ensure that we're capturing your thoughts and suggestions well. The next item, the capital improvement program, is one that is extremely important to the council. It fits right into one of your goals quite solidly, and several of them tangentially, and goes directly to quality of life, safety, enjoyment, value, just basic responsibility relative to the facilities, the infrastructure, the foundation of the community. You all know quite a bit about our infrastructure needs and our limitations. What you'll see, or what you have seen in the staff report and in the CIP, is a dose of reality, perhaps similar to some of the suggestions you were providing in the earlier item about making sure that we are looking at realistic assumptions and realistic capabilities. Our previous CIP was really a collection of projects and needs that hadn't been addressed over years, and it really was an accumulation, more of a library than an actual plan or program. For instance, we had, I forget, $37 million with dozens of projects to be done in the current fiscal year. Unless we really hurry up in the next couple of weeks, we're not going to satisfy those. It's just flat out unrealistic. And there were numerous projects that I found that didn't have a secure, reliable, ready source of funding. And that's not really the way that a planning document should be. So our Public Works Director and Mr. Jansen, his assistant, together with Mandy and April, took my suggestion to make that CIP more realistic, so that we have projects that are tied to real funding. We have projects that make sense from a sequential priority standpoint. We have projects that we believe we can deliver with the staff that we either have or the staff that we intend to bring on, just to really align what we're saying we're going to do with our ability to pay for it, do it, deliver it. And then also, there's also the impact, the burden, the distress, the exhaustion that the community experiences when we are in a constant conversation about infrastructure, and then also in a constant state of construction. And so there's a need to balance the disruption and the inconvenience that we may visit upon our community when we're tearing up streets and building stuff. And so all that needs to be balanced. And I think the staff's done a good job in trying to rebalance the CIP. I'll let April and Mark talk about what's in it, but you'll see that it's a much more lean CIP. And that's not to say it's bad. I believe that it's realistic. Those projects that we pushed out, we're pushing out as opposed to doing away with. So we intend to do those projects still, but we will do those when we have the capacity, financial first and foremost, but also staff capacity. So you'll see that we've got a much longer horizon, a 20, 30-year horizon, which is much more realistic. But we also have a much more realistic, immediate list of projects to be done. So I thank the staff for, I think, delivering a good product, and I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts about what we've put together. And I'll say, let's go on measure H, because that'll help us to make some progress here. So with that, April and Mark, would you explain the CIP?
Great, thank you so much. I'll start out and then defer over to Mr. Rincon if there are specific questions on projects. So as City Manager McCann did state, we have worked really closely with Public Works in trying to pare down the size and scope of the projects just to make sure that they are realistic. Knowing the state of our conditions of both the water and the wastewater fund, which we'll see in the budget report. We did take a pretty decent hit when it came to water conservation, which I applaud our community for achieving the water conservation that we needed during the phase 2 emergency, but it can be seen financially on what it's done for our funds. So based on that, unfortunately, we did have to take out some projects, and it's not that we're losing sight of them. We just took them out of the immediate 5-year plan. As funding becomes available, then we'll definitely add it back into the CIP projects. So the CIP projects, basically they were rolled over from year to year. So this is the first year that we really took a realistic look at the projects. Hey, what is rolled over? What are projects that priorities have shifted? We actually don't need to do those. What are projects that were completed via operations or could be shifted over to operations as opposed to through the capital improvement project? So what we did is we actually reduced the list from 46 items that was in this current, so fiscal year 22 CIP. We actually reduced it down to 29 projects. And so of the 29 projects, it is covering 5 divisions. We added one category this year, which is storm drain. Before, storm drain was always roped into the street CIP. So while it still has a streets number, we did differentiate it and add it as a separate entity in this capital improvement budget, primarily to be able to better track what projects are just for storm drains. Out of the 29 projects, they total about $32.5 million over the next 5 years. Over half of that is the wastewater treatment plant facility project. So that is a significant project that we are in the process now. It is happening. So I'm excited to see that move forward, because once that is completed, that means 2 legacy projects, one being Upper York Creek Dam removal, and the second being the wastewater treatment plant. They are over the finish line. So we're excited about that. The other thing that of the 29 projects, 5 of them are specific to pavement restoration. So you'll see all of those designated as R, which is roads. You'll have the starting year of the project -79. So anything you see with an R79 is specifically roads. The first year of those projects is design, and the second year is construction. So that way it's always rotating. And the primary funding source for that is our Measure T funds. So out of the 29 projects, 19 of them are specific for fiscal year 23. And they are 5 of those 19 are design only. And so, and out of all those projects, 12 are considered significant, which are over $200,000 in CIP. So again, we're looking at just the 12 projects that are anticipated to spend over $200,000 in the next fiscal year. So those are all listed in the staff report. Beyond that, there are 4 of those projects that are in design only that we do not have recognized funding mechanisms. And those are also designated in the report. So as soon as we do have the design finalized and we have what the construction estimates are, we will bring that back before City Council for funding authorization once we actually identify funding for that. For any of the projects that did not make the 5-year CIP list, again, we did not want to forget about those projects. And we also took into consideration all the work that was done through the various boards and committees that the council did authorize, and we took all of that information and we came up with a 30-year CIP list and cost estimates. So both of those have also been attached to the staff report. So I do want to thank council for their work and their guidance in putting those committees together, because it does give us more of a realistic viewpoint of what we're looking at over 30 years for our capital projects. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions that the council has, or if there's project specific, I'll definitely guide you over to Mr. Rincon, or if you'd like to add anything else regarding the projects on the current list.
I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you so much. I just wanted, this is probably a question for our Public Works Director, Rincon. I was curious about Oak Avenue again. I know that's come up. I wondered if that is in the pavement restoration on page 20, those design and construction. I just keep hearing about it more and more. When are we going to fix Oak Avenue? It's just gotten so bad. And I know that there were more issues underneath the road, but I just wanted to know for a realistic timeline when that one is coming up.
Right. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Chateau. But we have to address the utilities under the street, the city-owned utilities, well, namely stormwater and sewer. So if the measure passes, we could definitely start, advancing the utility, addressing the utilities under Oak, and then we can, address it in our upcoming pavement schedule. And I think we're scheduled to pave the intersection of Oak and Spring, I believe, this coming construction cycle. But then in I think year 3 or 4, Eric Jansen can correct me, we're scheduled to do the entire length. So we do have to advance the underground utilities in that location. Eric, did you have a?
So for Oak Avenue, 2 of the intersections are slated to receive paving this coming fiscal year. However, the bulk of Oak Avenue is not expected to get paving until fiscal year 26-27. So at the end of the paving program that we've laid out for you in the current plan.
So basically, it's on us to address the utilities and then have it ready for pavement.
Okay, so if the bond measure passes, then we have the money for the utilities, and then pavement happens after that project's done.
That's correct.
Thank you.
I've got some comments about that that I could put in now, or did I see Councilmember Hall and City Manager McCann?
No, go ahead, Mayor.
So I have some concerns with Oak Avenue as well. It's deteriorating very quickly. Also looking at College Avenue. Mr. McCann, did you have comments? I saw your hand had come up. Did you want to put comments in first?
I'm happy to. It may answer part of your question.
Yeah, thank you.
I too have heard about the condition of Oak Avenue. I've gone out there and driven it and walked it just to experience that, as well as a few of the other roads. I have some familiarity with pavement management systems and understand the sequence of events that has to happen. No one wants to assess and then deal with the underground utilities before addressing the pavement. There are a variety of different treatments that are available to improve pavement depending on the condition of the pavement itself. And so I've spoken with Mr. Rincon and Mr. Jansen specifically about Oak Avenue. I understand, the timing for that. That's not very satisfactory to most folks, because you look at the condition of Oak or other streets, but Oak is one that many people frequent. And I've asked about the potential to make some interim improvements, and that's to a certain degree, kind of good money thrown away, because in short order, you can go in there and tear it up. But there are some interim improvements that we might explore to just address some of the gross conditions out there, anticipating and knowing that in a few short years that'll be removed. And so it's a temporary improvement of a limited nature before the more significant reconstruction of the road. I don't have an answer for you. We'll look at those types of improvements much more specific, see if that makes financial sense, and if there's something that can be done that would provide that benefit.
Thank you. So I'm going to go on with my comments, and then Councilmember Hall, I'll circle back. So my concern with, particularly at this point with Oak and College, looking at the deteriorating surfaces and thinking, is there an interim solution if we're thinking 3 or 4 years out? The roads are deteriorating quite quickly, becoming, I believe, a safety issue. When I think of our reserves, our reserve policy at 30%, and currently we're at 60, which in a sense says to me we're holding back a certain amount of our revenue or ability to get in front of some projects, both either through the expenditure of those monies between 30 and 60%, or leveraging off those funds. So if we say we can't afford to do it, yet we're ahead of our revenue policy, I certainly understand the arguments for keeping a high reserve for times of emergency, but I'm wondering where the almost seems informal policy of 60% reserve or higher, if there's some value in thinking about how those funds are spent in terms of getting infrastructure up to speed so it doesn't degrade further. So I hope that we can have a conversation, certainly if two of the intersections are on slated for this year, looking at perhaps an interim solution to tie the street together, just to make it more walkable, drivable, bikeable. It is a connector between two of our schools and used by a lot of folks. So there's that specific aspect of how we're spending some of our revenue that ties in maybe to when we get into our larger budget conversation about how we're talking about our reserve policies. But I would like to see us look for any opportunity, both on Oak and College, because they're used by so many people and really so many children, and bicycling, et cetera. So if we can look for options, I would be very supportive. And now I see Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Rincon, for putting together the comprehensive project list. I think it's a fantastic starting point. It's wonderful to see. I like it organized, like you've got it organized here. I was just wondering if there's a couple of other dimensions. I know that's always the risk in putting data forward, is somebody always has another way of thinking about how to organize it. But I think it would be good if there was a column in here on the full 30-year list that showed which of these projects could be funded through the general fund. In other words, which, if we were in a bind, we could look to the general fund on the assumption that there's money in the general fund to pay for it. Which of these could be funded from the general fund? And similarly, is there any indication, and I know this is a long shot, some things I think might be obvious, but I think 80% of this list might be hard to do, but is there an understanding of which of these items is highest in terms of requiring some sort of renewal or replacement? Is there a way to organize it that way as well? And then we might be able to match general fund availability monies to high priority items that could be funded that way and begin closing the gap like this. I do think the whole conversation on the pavement and the roads is interesting. Part of the risk we face as a body is every single person who lives on a street in town feels the same about every single street. And so whoever shows up in front of us is going to make all of these same arguments over and over. None of it is wrong. The issue, of course, is that we're limited on revenue and where can we put available resources. So we can't do it all. But we also have in the third-year CIP 5 years of investment year by year, funded through Measure T. I think each of those years is great. We've done a good job coming up with a list and what those monies would go to. What we end up with, though, after 5 years is a PCI index score that's the same as where we're at right now today. We're not actually gaining any ground. We're just maintaining our current poor condition with that level of investment. So either our 30-year plan should include every single year ongoing, like where's the rest of the years for the PCI on our project list, or how do we fund it all up front in some lump sum method and pay for it out over time. But I think if we're going to, part of the issue in having a comprehensive list like this is it actually really comprehensive? I think on the streets, it's currently not right now. The other thing that would be useful in an exercise is understanding the impacts heading our way from state policy, such as the RENA impact coming our way. If we need to add 250 to 300 households, if we really intend to do that, what's the cost in infrastructure? Where does that go? What does it mean in terms of pricing that out? What's it mean in terms of our roads, in fact? How many more signalized intersections are we going to need to handle 1,000 more people on our streets, right? But what does all of that cost us? We already know it's state law. We have to do this somehow. It's a tough spot for us to be, but let's tally it up. What's it cost? And let's start adding to this list. And at some point, we'll have a big, long list. And part of our financial plan, I think, should be then this list becomes a primary input on deciding what are the priorities. If we only have this much money, where does it absolutely need to go? And then we have to hold the line on that decision. So anyway, this is a great start, Mr. Rincon and everybody else who's compiled it. I think it's fantastic and look forward to contributing more to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. Well, I'm actually genuinely excited about the opportunity to move forward on this discussion of our finances with new tools, better information. The staff work has just done a huge amount already, I think, to advance the council's understanding and discussion in really important ways. And for me, it really serves, just thinking about the scenarios we were talking about a bit earlier, to illustrate the classic conundrum for elected officials responding to their constituents' concerns. We see in scenario 3 what happens if $1 million in expenditures is added to our reserve levels, assuming that other things are staying essentially on the same track. And it takes those reserves down to something below 30%. And I'm pretty sure we can agree that that kind of reserve has already proven inadequate to keep us going at any kind of constant level of service when we hit a recession of any significance. So, so the conundrum for us is that we have real immediate projects or needs that relate directly to a lot of feedback we get from our residents. City streets are a classic example. This is a recurring subject. It comes up probably roughly once a decade. But we can also see now, or we're beginning to be able to see, that if we make a commitment to fixing that problem without having additional revenue, we're laying the foundation for an even bigger problem when there's an economic downturn. So I'm sure we'll work together to find the best balance that we can under the present circumstances. But the classic mistake, and it's been made over and over again, is to focus on the near term, satisfy the most immediate concerns of our constituents, and commit ourselves to decisions with big negative consequences long term. And I think it's absolutely essential that we break out of that cycle. And I want to thank staff for giving us the tools to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
I agree wholeheartedly with Councilmember Hardy. Absolutely. I'm focused on focused on the downtown sidewalk improvement. R1881, it's on page 68 of the staff report. I just want to have clarification, make sure we have this project sufficiently described and covered. As I see it, the project that's here is basically only a part of the overall phase one. I just will need clarification there. It looks to me that it's basically from Pine Street to Adams Street for the $2.5 million. So we're only getting, that's not even phase one, that's phase 1A. So I need some clarification there, because as I understand it, that phase one is well over $6 million now. But more importantly, where is the balance of phase one and phase two and phase three on the 30-year plan? Because we promised ourselves that we were not going to drop things off the list, but all I see is a description of a portion of phase one, but nothing else going forward. I think we need to keep those in mind. Do we have the money for that? No. But at least we have a design for it. So maybe that's clarification. And while you're thinking about that, it would be helpful for me to be absolutely sure what two intersections on Oak Avenue are going to be done and when, because frankly, my patience is getting a little thin here. This issue has come up repeatedly, and we need to be more focused, and the staff needs to say, this is when the ones that are being done, and this is when it's going to get done, because that's what our constituents are expecting. And so I need clarification on both of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and address that if you like, or I can hold off.
No, please, Mr. Rincon.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Eric to get the specific dates on the two intersections, but those are coming up shortly. In terms of the downtown sidewalk, as you know, our funding, we kind of lost our funding. It was redirected to other projects in the valley. And so we're looking at phase one being, like you said, it's a shorter portion of it. It's from Mitchell to Pine Street. And unfortunately, it doesn't include, most of the downtown. That would be a following phase. And we would be looking at, I believe, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but OBAG 4 funding for that, which, is still just a pipe dream at this point. It's not even, even being considered right now. because we're still going through a phase definition for the next phase for OBAG. So, that's something that you're right. It has to be within a 30-year plan, but when it can get delivered, it has to be, a priority that has to be set by council, because it's going to be a costly project. Eric, could you add the dates on that?
Okay, well, starting with Oak Avenue, the two intersections that we plan to be doing in this coming fiscal year are the intersections with Adams Street and Tainter Street.
Okay.
Now, as for the downtown sidewalk project, as Councilmember Hardy had pointed out, we have had a longstanding need to focus on the stuff immediately in front of us. And unfortunately, the downtown sidewalk project is one of those projects where we have had to focus on the need in front of us. The funding that we expect to get through OBAG 3 will be the same as had been awarded to us under OBAG 2, and that's $1.2 million. Now, unfortunately, with costs as out of control as they are right now, $1.2 million plus an almost equal match, probably about $1 million from the city, will deliver only about the first third of the project we had hoped to deliver.
Okay.
And that is why we have done this the way we have. We simply will not have the $6+ million that we think we need to complete the full phase 1 project. And at this point, we're just trying to make sure we can deliver what we can using the funding that is available to us. So yeah, this is a stopgap measure, but it is the best one we have available to us to address sidewalks in downtown.
Okay, thank you. Just to follow up, I noticed that some of the easement work will be going into next year's budget, not this coming budget. My understanding, or at least my sense, is that most of that easement work would be something that a third-party vendor would be doing for us, the title work, the easement work. And I'm wondering why we couldn't, for the whole project. I mean, that's a major impediment that we face, right? In addition to funding. Is there a reason why we would not be doing that work? My assumption is that we were doing that work, frankly, to get more clarity on the need to acquire easements. Why would we wait till next year when we can do, well, yeah, I'll just say that.
So we are actually working on easements concurrently. So what we are working on right now, we have a consultant who is pulling the title reports for the full length of the project, not just the 1/3 we hope to deliver under OBAG 3. However, actual purchase of those easements as needed can be delayed. So we have purposely pushed out that particular part of acquiring right-of-way so that we do not have to expend those funds in this coming fiscal year. We can push that out another year. But we will continue to study for the full length of the project. Now, part of the reason why we've selected the northern portion of the project to deliver under OBAG 3 is because it has the fewest right-of-way issues associated with it. We more or less have all the land we need, so we can proceed without having to get bogged down in any right-of-way or private property rights issues.
Okay, and then could somebody respond to whether the rest of the phases, phase 1, the rest of phase 1, and then phase 2 and phase 3, will those fit into the 30-year plan just on paper so that they can at least be there? Because, I think Councilmember Hall, I think, comes up with $159 million. And I think that's probably another 15 million right there in those phase 2 and 3. So that could get pretty close. And there's probably other things that we don't have on here.
I'm at 240, Paul.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
All right, I'll stop there. Thank you. I know somebody else wanted to talk.
Yeah, that'll cost us more than I think
City
OBAG
Manager
has to
McCann.
offer.
Yeah, a couple things. One, once again, thank you for the good comments, the suggestions, the appreciation for the work. All of that is very helpful. The future phases of the downtown sidewalk project, I thought we had in there. If we don't, we will include it because that certainly is a project before us. It's over the long term. We should list what we think those costs might be. So we'll reflect that. But I just wanted, if you would allow me just a moment to respond to a couple of the comments, and I'd be happy to wait and get Mr. Hall's, and I can try to answer that too. No, okay, I'll go forward. I thought that the comment about adding a column to reflect those projects that might be funded by general fund is an interesting one. The general fund is without strings for the most part, and you have the ability to utilize those funds as you wish. In fact, you have a good example of using general fund money already as a part of the financing for the wastewater treatment plant. So we're using general fund dollars and other dollars available to the city in loans and financing there. And you can certainly use general fund dollars as you wish for any number of projects, whether it's operations or actual projects, so pavement projects, bridge projects, facility projects. It's always best practice to have the enterprises support themselves to the extent that they can, and any loan from the general fund to an enterprise ought to be just that, a loan and then returned in future. Those are policy questions, so we can certainly do that. It's much more challenging, in fact, either discouraged or not permitted to have it go the other way, to have, for instance, pavement paid for by water rates. And so we'll be certain not to have a column that shows anything like that. As I was listening to comments, it kept coming back in my mind to the long range financial plan, and different comments about whether it's pavement conditions. So, for instance, Oak Avenue or any other street in town. That's a question of prioritization. Where does the council wish to place the priority on the use of dollars? And so the budget is really the manifestation of the council's goals, the vision, the mission, the desires of the community. Those are all the words. It gets put into place by application of dollars to meet those things. And so that's how the priorities get set. And so if the council places emphasis on a particular service or a particular facility or a particular level of service, whether it's maintenance or new facilities, we'll reflect that in the budgetary application. So for instance, if the council wanted to advance the improvement of pavement conditions, or you wished to achieve a higher standard, higher condition of pavement, so a higher PCI, that clearly takes the application of additional dollars. And that may be a council priority, which is a future discussion, to determine that instead of having pavement at a 56 or a 60 PCI rating, we desire something higher. We know to achieve that will require sustained annual contributions into that pavement fund. But that's just an example of one of the inputs that would go into a long-range financial plan. You can change that from pavement to parks, pavement to libraries, pavement to fire safety. You've already done that with respect to the fire department, for instance. You all said that we wanted a higher level of service in the fire department, so we moved from our part-time and paid call firefighters to full-time firefighters. Those are all priorities that once council has that policy discussion, we can then turn that around into a long-range financial plan to come up with the monies to address those priorities, whatever they may be. That has to be married with the desires and the capacity of the community, because those dollars come either from taxes or from other sources of revenue that maybe have some impact on the community. So to me, it goes to priorities. We will capture these points and make some modification to the CIP. When we come back, you'll see that downtown sidewalk listed there. We'll also, though, have a conversation about interim pavement opportunities specific to Oak and College, but we'll also look maybe at a more general concept. That will likely have some effect on our underlying Measure T pavement funds, or alternatively, we can make a suggestion of alternate funding, which might be that fund balance, the quote excess reserve. But those would be for your choice, and you can see the effect if we move money from one column to the other. But that would be an example of meeting a priority, which is the poor condition of a particularly important road. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And I had earlier seen Councilmember Hall. If you
Thank
have
you. I just wanted to follow on to Manager McCann's comments. I thought they were spot on. First, just one quick note. I think one item that might be nice to include on the comprehensive list at the top is just sort of a legend that might also indicate that current cost estimates are as of spring 2022. Keeping in mind, obviously, that at call it a 10% inflation rate, if we don't add even a single item to this list, we'll be at almost 160 million next year, right? So there's a huge impact there, and it would be nice to keep that number. The other issue, of course, is do we have staff and capability to update those cost estimates at least annually going forward? If we could, my desire would always be to do it every 90 days, but maybe there's some other time frame that makes sense, so we have a current picture in front of us as often as we can get it. In terms of prioritizing services, I think Mr. McCann's exactly spot on with what we need to do here and how much pain is associated with each service area that we're providing to the community, whether it's repairing streets, how much do we want to put into that pavement management program, or other services, whether it's library or fire or police or parks and rec, et cetera, across the board. So, and this is where, start going back to the conversation we had about the budget itself and where we are today. It would be good, and hopefully internally staff has done this. Is there a real clear understanding, director by director, of the pain associated with the lack of staff? I know that you're feeling it daily, but what would your program look like if the opposite question was provided to you? The opposite question being, don't give me zero change. Tell me what it will take for you to provide high quality services to the community. What does that look like? What's included in that? So it's another sort of bookend in this whole conversation for us to understand, well, what is that? I mean, frankly, I look at our town, I think we have 5,900 souls here, 2,200 households. Would we incorporate as a city today, knowing all of the bureaucracy, all of the demands on us today? What's it cost to maintain these services across the board? Can we actually effectively do it, right? If we had the option to incorporate today, would we want to do it or not? I think probably not, but it's a nice way of clean slating things and saying, well, what does it cost to provide all of our services to the community? What's that look like? And that might be a nice educational exercise. Obviously, it's a very big exercise, but it would be helpful, I think, for everybody to understand that. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Mr. Rincon, and then we'll open it to public comment. And then Mr. Rincon.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick comment on the cost estimates. These are not engineering cost estimates. They're just order of magnitude cost estimates. So it's basically, a level of effort, kind of a planning guide for us. So let's not put too much emphasis on the dollar amounts as shown, because obviously those get refined as the project gets developed. Also, in terms of, I would love to update these costs on an annual basis at least, because we can't keep upping these costs without any sort of knowledge base. And typically I would hire a consultant that has that skill set in-house so that we can update these costs annually, because we do need to update, with concurrent costs. The thing is, what I see when I got a hold of this document, it looked to me like a lot of the costs were just way out of date, or the project was ill-defined. So I'd still like to go through that exercise, and I believe I've put in a budget to go ahead and address that this coming fiscal year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rincon. Which leads me to one other quick question or suggestion, I guess. Is there a way to include a column here that indicates where in the life cycle of the project we are? If we have a life cycle methodology that says each project basically has 4 or 5 phases that we go through, from, conceptual idea, which is just a ballpark number. It could swing by 90% or 100% or 200% or cost estimates, into a planning phase, into an execution, into a whatever. If there's a grammar tool, a legend that's attached to the CIP that helps the community understand what phase we're in on each project, then we know here's the level of confidence we have in the cost estimate. It's just a ballpark, Mr. Rincon's doing the best he can. We don't know yet. It's not been scoped, no conversation, but boom, normally these things cost X. Or we're already off and running. We're beyond shovel ready. There's actually people with, digging in the dirt out there. This is a good firm number, plus or minus 10%. So we have 90% level of confidence in the estimates that's shown. Something like that might help with just simply a life cycle phase indicator. In each phase, we can develop simple rules around, this is a ballpark or it's not a ballpark. So anyway, just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll look to City Manager McCann, then go to the public. Then I think we need to move to our last item just to make sure time-wise.
Great. Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Hall's comment, because I think that's very helpful, both for the CIP, long-range financial plan, budgeting, and again, jumping into the development of the criteria and the strategy for a long-range financial plan. What I heard just resonated with me very much, and that's the opposite of sort of how we approach things, which is, how are we going to get by with what we've got? What do we need to cut in order to keep the lights on? Which, as a message to the community, is not super encouraging, as opposed to turning it around, saying, what is it that we desire? What do we want to be? And how do we get there? That's a much more hopeful, optimistic, confident approach. And I think that St. Helena should be very optimistic, should be very positive, and should be very confident. There's lots that can be done, but I think that's a conversation with the community. Are we content with what we have, and what additional things would we like to have? And I can just give you 2 very quick examples that I've lived through. One in my recent job in Mill Valley, and then the other a little farther back, but a little closer to home here, just up the street in Calistoga. So Calistoga was in a very desperate situation a dozen years or more ago, but the leaders there said, what do we want to be? And they developed strategies to address their needs, to build a pool, to build an art center, to address their water deficiencies, to improve their streets, to engage with their community, to provide housing. And that was through things that they had control over. And much of that was related to development, to identify sites that made sense, to identify the appropriate scale, to encourage development that would help their community. Not perfect, but it certainly addressed their financial needs, and they're in a much better position today. The other example is Mill Valley, very different community, but the community said they wanted to address fire threats, emergency preparedness. They wanted to improve their terrible condition of their pavement, and they wanted to improve quality of life for the residents through recreation and cultural programming. So outstanding library, outstanding community center, programming for children and seniors. And through a communication with the community, they identified how to do that through taxes, municipal service taxes, but also through leveraging and partnering with private development to have public-private partnerships that could deliver those things. So I just give you those examples because those are not from outer space. They're from up the road and from our area. and they're completely within the grasp of St. Helena. And we've got outstanding staff who I think are capable to lead us in that direction and help. Mr. Jans has just come from a very progressive community. He and Maya have terrific experience in some of those areas. April and Mark and Mandy and the rest of our staff have a lot of experience and I think can guide us forward. So I just want to try to be as hopeful and realistic as possible, but I think the comments that I heard are right on the mark, and I think we have the ability to address those things by focusing, identifying priorities, confirming those with our community, and then acting on those things. So I think it's good.
Thank you. And we'll look now to public comment, see if there's public comment.
There are no raised hands.
Okay, we'll bring it back to council and get ready to move on. I just want to make one comment that'll also pertain to all the items, really. I wonder if there's a value in terms of looking at the context of where we sit as a city in terms of revenue, reserve, CIP. You know, if we were to look at 20 other cities of 6,000, where do we sit in terms of how we balance our revenue with our reserve as compared to CIP? I grasp the conundrum of what we save as opposed to what we spend, and the idea that we want to be planning long-term, but also recognizing if there are, you know, current needs that are significant, how we appropriate funds to handle the things that are facing us. So that looking at the larger context may be of a benefit, as we learned in working with Michael Coleman through the League of Cities a number of years ago with the financial diagnostic. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. Just a quick reference point for you. Calistoga, I believe their general fund revenues are $12-13 million annually. And I think their 5-year CIP is about $7 million total, looking at around $2 million per year. We have a significantly different problem here from years of lack of investment in our CIP. And Yountville, of course, is almost the exact opposite. They basically are flush with money. I mean, frankly, we ought to ask Yountville to loan us money. They have plenty of money and they have no repair going on. They don't need to repair anything. They've already addressed it. So they're flush. Be great. Let's get a low interest loan from Yountville. I don't know how to do that, but.
Well, we also have some financial aspects working in our favor as we look at our reserve and what our revenue is. And my suggestion is that as we have the conversation, we look at a number of cities in context, and that might give us a sense of where we are in that balance. That's just my suggestion. So with that, if we continue and look, because I think we're going to have a time issue if we don't move into our 5.2, which is the budget workshop, the review of fiscal year 2022 to 23 budget recommendation, and we'll turn back to Mr. McCann and Dr. Mitz.
Thank you. Thank you for those good comments. We will make some revisions to the CIP and bring that back to you. And then have a lot of good suggestions and notes for future discussion, particularly as it relates to the long-range financial plan. So appreciate that very much. Then the last item here is talking about our budget, both the general fund budget as well as the water and wastewater enterprise budgets. April and Mandy and all of the departments have put a ton of work into this. I can't tell you how many hours we spent looking at different ideas, options, and whatnot. And so I appreciate everybody's work and cooperation as we've looked at different options. We've shared with council some of our thinking here in our meeting in April, and then also subsequent to that. There's certainly lots of different ways to approach this. We're looking at this from an immediate budget in order to carry us forward. And I fully anticipate that in future, Santa Elena will have multi-year budgets. And so you're not just looking at, one fiscal year at a time, but looking at multiple years so you can plan out a bit better. And then also have the benefits of that long-range financial plan to help. Here, though, we're looking at the coming fiscal year. We're looking at that with caution and financial prudence, knowing that there are some uncertainties both in the economic world, but also in the demands before us. And so we do have a substantial fund balance that we anticipate we will have recommendations as the year progresses. We have a practice of add backs, and so there's a number of those that we'll be bringing to you in future months. But I'll let April and Mandy just talk about where we are with the proposal. It addresses a number of the points and suggestions that Council has made in recent weeks and months, as far as some key positions to help us move forward with the work that we've got before us. So with that, April, can you pick up from there and walk us through your slides, please?
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, so a thumbs up from anyone who can see my screen, and it's the right one. Okay, perfect. Well, I have 150 slides to go through. No, I'm just kidding. There's only about 22. I just want to see the look on all your faces. So again, this is our draft fiscal year 21-22 budget. We have refined the numbers from when we actually did our preliminary estimates in April. And again, those are very, very preliminary. As we get further and further in the year, our revenue estimates actually get more and more solidified. Go to my first. So in the budget development process, some things that we did keep in mind is we wanted to make sure that any new expenditures and ongoing expenditures do align with City Council goals, as well as the City Council work plan. We did utilize conservative revenue assumptions. The only assumptions that have changed from the preliminary budget on April 5th that we presented is we did get updated information from Avenue, who does all of our sales tax projections and collections forecasting for us. And they did have a pretty significant change in their numbers, which we were excited about that change. And so that did actually allow us to close that gap even further. The other item that we did is we don't typically budget for this, but we really took another look at the excess ERAF funding, which is the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund. The city does not budget for that. And what we would do is when we find out the actual numbers, typically in August, that would be part of the add back discussion with the City Council. We looked at a 10-year span on what we've actually received for ERAF. It has gone anywhere from $86,000 to $450,000. So you can see it is definitely a pretty big swing, but we did particularly look over the last 5 years. It has been trending upwards. So we did add an additional $230,000 to this year's fiscal budget. And we feel confident in that number based off of what we have received for the past couple of years. Other considerations in the budget development was healthcare cost increases. Typically, it's right around that 5% mark. We usually find out at the end of June, so too late to incorporate the actual numbers into an adopted budget. So we always add a 5% escalator. Also, another portion of the budget development is change in labor costs. Additionally, restoration of positions or new positions, the increases to PERS unfunded liability, and also one-time versus ongoing expenses. A quick refresher of the City Council goals. It is something that we like to put right in front of both the council and the community, as well as staff members, because it is important for us to not lose sight of what your goals are, and just to make sure that we are maintaining them. So the first is to improve and maintain safe and reliable city infrastructure with a commitment to environmental stewardship and public health. Second is to stabilize, maintain, and improve access to housing. The third is to enhance organizational performance and commitment to full public participation, ongoing communication, and regional collaboration. Fourth is to ensure long-term economic sustainability while supporting St. Helena's charm and rural character. Fifth is to support thriving families and enhance the safety, well-being, and healthy development of our youth. And the fifth is support initiatives that respond to and plan for climate change. So all of these were taken into consideration in the formation of the budget. So an update for our draft fiscal year 23 revenues. So you'll see our three main categories is our property, our sales, and our TOT, as well as our other categories, which the other categories account for about 10% of the total budget. So our revised draft is $17.3 million in revenues. And when we headed into the pandemic back in 2020, we did anticipate that we would go back to pre-pandemic levels by fiscal year 23. So as you can see, our fiscal year 19 was pre-pandemic, and we are exceeding our pre-pandemic. And primarily that's due to really, really high performance in our sales tax as well as our TOT. For budgeting purposes, property tax, we factored in a 3.4% increase, which was the increase that we actually received in fiscal year 22. For sales tax, we are using Avenue's most conservative estimates, or I'm sorry, most likely estimates. For TOT, we are utilizing our fiscal year 19 actual plus 4%, which is consistent with what other entities in the Valley are doing. If you do look at our fiscal year 22 estimated versus the 23 draft, it is a slight decrease in the numbers, but that is also anticipating that are we on a bubble for our TOT? Our TOTs, you know, do we have a lot of visitors that are coming into town that maybe next year they might travel internationally as the economy starts opening up a little more? So what we did is we had stayed with the fiscal year 19 actual plus 4%. And then our other revenues, it is a decrease of about $600,000, but that decrease is primarily due to one-time revenues that we received as part of the COVID relief package. So you can see there is a decrease, but overall, from what our estimated for fiscal year 22 and our draft is, we're looking at about just shy of $1 million increase for our revenue. For expenses, you'll see the total expenses is $17.4 million. So it is, for all intents and purposes, a balanced budget. We are making the recommendation that we utilize approximately $100,000 from the fund balance in general fund, knowing that our revenue estimates are probably going to come in at a little bit higher, but we also know that we have a pretty healthy fund balance right now. So this first slide, which is also included in the staff report, shows a breakdown by department. So you'll see anywhere from non-departmental down to public works. And you'll see what the fiscal year draft looks like. Again, a slight increase over our fiscal year 22 adjusted budget. The next slide shows the general fund breakdown by category. And I do see Councilmember Hall's hand open.
Yes,
so.
Dr. Metz, I see Councilmember Hall.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just curious. I see the, thank you. The increase in fire as expected. What's the change with the police? Why did that climb so much?
One of the changes with the police had to do with the recent unfreezing of a police officer position. And then the other details I would have to look, unless Mandy knows it off at the top of her head. There's a lot of numbers swirling in her head.
Yeah, there was some capital equipment that's also added in there that's mandated by the state.
Okay, was that wasn't their cruisers or anything? That was something else?
No, it's reporting equipment. And like I said, it's state mandated. So we do have to implement that in this upcoming year.
Okay, thank you very much, Mandy.
Yep.
Okay, so the next slide that we go to, so it takes the same information, so our same general fund estimated budget, but it breaks it down by category. So you can see, and this is typical of most cities, where our staffing, so if you look at our salary and benefits, is approximately 60% of our entire general fund budget. So you can see categorically how things break down for the general fund. The expenses that are included in the draft budget before you today, these are primarily the cost drivers from the adopted 22 budget to the draft 23 budget. So you'll see you have Napa College tenant improvements. We've also marked where it's discretionary and where it's considered one-time cost. So you had $350,000 for the tenant improvements. You had the addition of 4 full-time firefighters of $300,000. Normal step cost of step increases. So this is just staffing going between the steps in the salary schedule of $225,000. Health insurance increases of $102,000. Planning, and this is for a CEQA consultant, which was necessary, is $100,000. PERS unfunded liability. So this is the additional discretionary payment that we're making to pay off the unfunded liability in a 15-year clip. So this is above what we paid last fiscal year. PD capital equipment, that's a portion of it, is $40,000. And then trees, this is for inventory and maintenance of trees that we did not have in last year's budget. So our overall revenue and expenses, this just gives you a chart showing where we were at in fiscal year 19. So this was considered pre-pandemic. You see the fiscal year 20 actual dropped, 21 where you start going up, your 22 adopted, and then here where your 22 estimates are where we're looking at. So again, we're returning to pre-pandemic levels, but it is important to note we did not do this for the purpose of this presentation, but if we would have been taking the same revenue and staffing or revenue and expense projections at the fiscal year 19 levels, we would have actually been escalated up much higher here. So where we're coming at in our actual budget, while it's higher than pre-pandemic, if you wouldn't have taken that blip in the economy, we would have actually been trending much higher, both our revenue and expenses. So the general fund estimated net position, you can see we're starting out strong is $10.4 million. It is important to note that while we're looking at this 59% reserve, the reason we have this high balance is because of being very fiscally conservative and very prudent during COVID-19. If we hadn't have made some really, really hard choices and really hard reduction in concessions from staffing, from cutting and services, this would have been a much lower balance. In addition, our sales tax and TOT last fiscal or the current fiscal year 22, did come in much higher than we anticipated. So that is what has led to this very healthy fund balance. As noted in the long range financial forecast and the CIP, while we are looking at a very healthy fund balance, we know there's a lot of things that we're not doing that will quickly eat into this. So what we're anticipating a $10.4 million fund balance going into fiscal year 23. Our estimated revenues is $17.2 million. Estimated expenses is $17.3 million. For the draft budget, we are recommending use of fund balance of approximately $105,000. It will leave an estimated fund balance of $10.3 million, which is 59%. So with that, I will pause and answer any questions and or receive any feedback on the general fund portion before we move on to the water wastewater.
I have one question. I want to see if the council has any input or questions first. In terms of looking at the unassigned fund balance sitting at roughly 10.4, do we have a trajectory of how, say, over the last 3 years that's been sitting in terms of percentage or actually amount and percentage towards the general fund?
Yeah, the last 3 years, it's been pretty steady at that dollar or that percentage amount, just based on sales tax and TOT coming in higher than expected through the pandemic. Prior to that, we were right around the 30 to 35% level. When I first started here back in 2014, we were, I want to say we started about 9% and it gradually built our way up with the passage of Measure D. So you can definitely see how other revenue enhancements come into play in getting that fund balance to a healthier level.
Thank you. And if there's a way to break out the dollar amount, say over the last 3 years of how that's built, that would be, I don't need it right now, but just might be helpful to see just in terms of trajectory. And then I'm seeing Councilmember Hall and Councilmember Doring.
Thank you, Dr. Mitz. I'm just curious, what percentage, maybe just follow up an email would be great. What percentage of our total anticipated expenses this year are non-discretionary. So how much, or I should say non-controllable, how much of that 17 million is just going to continue to roll forward in time versus what might be a one-off, or what might be, even if it rolls forward in time, what's a decision that this council can make to either increase or stop? Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Yeah, this may be directed to Mandy, I'm not sure, but I'm kind of at a loss. I don't really have a firm grasp of the glass fire request for reimbursement, what we have requested in terms of overall monetary reimbursement, what we have received, and then what we expect. I don't know if this is the proper time, and what we expect to get, just in rough numbers.
I can definitely follow up with the numbers, but we've received the bulk of the reimbursements so far. We do still have an outstanding reimbursement request for the Meadowood tank, some small costs related to the building we lost at the water treatment plant. And then we are still working with our insurance company as well for some reimbursements for the cleaning of the buildings as well too. But I can definitely send an email with those costs.
Okay, thank you so much. And then I would just offer this. I don't know if this is cutting edge budget making, but it seems to me that we should be making budgetary decisions, and really all decisions, municipal decisions, with a climate change lens. I don't know if that's something where people train you to look at when you make a decision, how does this impact climate change one way or another? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Maybe that's something down the road and we're not caught up on that, but it just seems to me that just every time we make a decision, it has to have some sort of sense of how is this affecting us overall. I think we do it intuitively, but it would be great I would love to be trained on every time I, make a decision as a city council member. What is the effect? What is the impact? That'd be great to see someday. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing both City Manager McCann and Councilmember Hall. Councilmember Hall, would you defer to City Manager to see if there's clarification?
Sure. Yeah.
I'll be super quick. I'll just remind the council that recently you all adopted the climate change emergency resolution, and part of that was to apply a climate change lens to policy decisions. And so it's a good reminder and something that we should include in our staff reports and policy discussions with you all. So that's a very good point, Mr. Doring.
Thank you. And Councilmember Hall.
No additional comment. Thank you.
Okay, this is our one item. So what we'll do is we'll hold public comment on this until we're going to do with the water and wastewater. Is that correct, Dr. Mitz?
That is correct.
Okay, we'll hold public comment until we get through those items.
Only 125 more slides to go, I promise. So for the water and wastewater funds, as with last year going into the phase 2 water emergency, due to the unknowns as well as the ongoing water emergency and impact on the revenues, it has been necessary for the city to remain fiscally cautious in the development of the 22-23 budget. The departments, similar to the general fund, were asked to keep the majority of the expenses status quo and asked to present no significant increase in expenses. And then if there were any requests for additional expenses, they did have to provide a rationale for augmentation of their budget. The draft fiscal year 23 water revenues are projected to be $6.6 million, which is actually a $240,000 decrease from the fiscal year 22 adopted budget. While we went through last year's budget adoption, we actually did shave the revenue estimates for the water fund. I want to believe it was approximately $800,000 due to the estimated water conservation measures. We did cut that. While we cut it, we did see that revenues are actually coming in lower than that. So again, it is great work by our community to actually conserve water, but obviously that is affecting the bottom line for our revenues. So during I already mentioned that. Staff does continue to see conservation and are reducing the estimated revenues accordingly. As everyone knows, the city is in the midst of a utility rate study. However, it is not anticipated new rates will go into effect until spring of 2023. So any adjustments in rates to be able to offset the amount of the water conservation, they will be able to recoup some of the revenues, but not total revenues. And
Dr.
I do
Mitz,
see
yes, I just
Yep.
want to jump in. Councilmember Hardy has a hand up, maybe for clarification.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to mention to Dr. Mitz that the March executive order from the governor, I don't remember the number, calls for a 20% decrease in water use that applies statewide. At some point, I'm sure we'll be having a council level discussion about how to achieve compliance with that executive order. I mention it simply because it might have some influence on how you project revenues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitz. I'm saying Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. The one other item, and I don't know if there's another page on revenues, Dr. Metz, but one other item here that I know you're working on it, but at some point it'd be good to have it come back, I guess, is on the whole rate penalty picture. What does that look like today? Do we have mechanisms to accelerate any collections? Does it make sense across the board or not? Can we actually effectively do it or not, et cetera? But it'd be nice to have some conversation on that at some point. Thank you.
that is a great segue. I do actually have a staff report that is in the queue that I've been working on that is seeking policy guidance and direction from City Council for the collection of those penalties for unpaid penalties. So that is something that is in the pipeline.
Terrific. Thank you much.
I'll go to the next page. So water fund expenses, the draft fiscal year 23 water expenses are $6.6 million, which is approximately a $500,000 decrease from the fiscal year 22 adopted budget. So we did present this as a balanced budget. So the revenues and the expenses are identical. There are certain things that could change that right now, primarily for both our water and our wastewater funds. We do have temporary water treatment operators up at the water and wastewater treatment plant that are helping out because of staffing shortages. If we do need to continue those contracts, while we do have some salary savings with the unfilled positions, it is not enough salary savings to offset hiring temporary operators. So that is something that's going to factor for next year for the budget. Due to the anticipated decrease in revenues, again, staff eliminated all non-essential purchases. And there's a decrease in expenses, again, for water distribution due to the current OTS contract. At the last council meeting, City Council did approve the position of a treatment plant manager, which would actually oversee both plants. Once that position does get into place, we are anticipating being able to at least eliminate 1 to 2 of the OTS positions. And I see Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you, Dr. Metz. I thought I just heard you say that it was more expensive to use the outside service provider than it is to fill our own positions, but the slide says there's a decrease in expenses because we're using the outside service provider. So I'm hearing 2 different things, unless I'm not understanding.
Yeah, the decrease is anticipation that we are not going to be utilizing OTS once we get those positions filled.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I might need more coffee. So the next slide, again, is the water fund, the department expenses. So you'll see total $6.6 million, and then you can see how it's broken down by departments. You see primarily it's in the water treatment, the $2.5 million of the total $6.6 million. Here you'll see the breakdown by category. So again, your salary and benefits down to services, supplies, maintenance. Supplies does include the purchase of water from Napa. When we look at the overall fund balance, so we're looking at a starting position of approximately 3.2 million. Again, our revenues and expenses is 6.6 million, leaving the same $3.2 million fund balance, which is at 48%. So any questions before I move on to the wastewater side?
My question on that, Dr. Mitz, and I'll ask it on the wastewater too, is just in looking at the general fund revenue, is looking at that reserve balance or that fund balance, if there's a trajectory over the last couple of years, if it's easy enough to track that down.
Yeah, I can definitely get that information. Yeah, and what I can do is I can get that information, and as we prepare the final report for budget adoption, I can include that in the narrative of the budget adoption.
That's great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
So moving on to wastewater fund balance, the wastewater fund. So for revenues, we're projecting $3.37 million, which is the same as the fiscal year 22 adopted budget. Again, same concept as the water. Staff did reduce revenues in fiscal year 22, factoring the drought conditions. And then again, we are in the midst of our utility rate study. However, we don't anticipate that rates will be adopted until spring. The expenses are 3.376, again, which it does remain at the same levels of the fiscal year 22 adopted budget. And it has the same factors. Staff did eliminate any non-essential purchases, and then also we're anticipating a decrease in the services based on the OTS contract. So as we look at it by department, you'll see the total budget of 3.376 million. And again, going from non-departmental down to your collection, your treatments, which is the bulk of the money, or bulk of the funding, as well as your public works admin budget. You look at the wastewater by category. Again, you'll see salary and benefits account for just shy of a half of it, half of the total budget. And again, the total of 3.376. And looking at the fund balance for the water, you'll see, or wastewater, you'll see $3.77 million. You'll see revenue and expenses are neutral. Ending fund balance of 3.7 million, which is 112%. It is important to note, out of this 112% and this $3.7 million, approximately $2.95 million will be transferred over to the wastewater CIP for the completion of the wastewater treatment plant upgrades. And that was part of the overall plan of finance. Of this 2.95, a little over $1 million is from the settlement agreement that had gone into place. So with that, I will take any questions and feedback regarding the draft water and wastewater budget.
I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Thank you, Mayor. This may be properly directed to the Public Works Director. I'm wondering what your sense is, whether we are going to be going over budget on the wastewater treatment plant, or should we at least anticipate that possibility? I know in the staff report I saw, and I remember that the council made a decision to potentially loan general fund monies for that purpose. And the reason I ask that is, if we're going to have further exploration of what our reserves are in our general fund, should we be cognizant of that issue, whether it's $1 million or $2 million or whatever that number is, we have to consider that potential, correct?
Yes, Vice Mayor, you're absolutely correct. We do need to consider that potential, because there is, when you're in the midst of a construction project, there is that chance of a request for additional funds for unknown, unseen items, and of course, those change orders do come across our desk. They are coming at us, and we're addressing some significant ones right now. So that's something to consider as we move forward.
Right. And then looking from it from another perspective, as we go through that process, the construction process, I assume that there may be times or moments where you go, well, we can upgrade a certain part of this project, for example, to more quickly deliver recycled water or whatever, but we don't have that in the budget now. We could look at that potential also, correct? Or is that
Well,
just not feasible?
yeah, we're really sticking to the scope of services. So right now, we're just delivering the wastewater treatment plant as
Okay.
is. We're not addressing the recycles at this point because that'll come in the next phase.
Right.
So we're just trying to, meet our obligations for the state in order to bring the water to a higher standard.
Thank you.
I've got just a couple brief comments and want to thank the Vice Mayor for bringing that up and looking at the number, the reserve number for the wastewater treatment plant or enterprise at 112 right now. But if we lose that significant number, that's going to drop down. This is, I would say, both a responsibility and an opportunity, this upgrading of the wastewater treatment plant. So how we balance and measure to make sure that that project moves forward and moves forward in the best way we can, I think is a really valid concern and again, an opportunity. So wanting to make sure that we're balancing that, particularly if that fund balance dips so low. I have to run into the other room to get my charger. I can still hear what's going on. Mr. Doring, would you just take over for a moment while I grab my charger?
Meeting adjourned. Mr. McCann, it looks like you want to make a comment and I welcome it. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. It seems like I think the presentations are done. Where's April? April, is that correct? Yeah, great. And I just wanted to acknowledge in the budget item, I come from a large family, and I think my parents would always say that you're my favorite, but I had 6 brothers and sisters, and so they were also the favorites. And so while we've spent a fair amount of time talking about sort of all things infrastructure, there are other children in the family here, and we care about them too. So I just wanted to note that the planning and building department are really engaged in some super important, complicated, and significant matters, as you know. So the budget will allow Maya and Aaron and the rest of the crew there to carry on with the housing element update, the comprehensive zoning code update, and that's going to guide the community for the next 15 or 20 years. Carefully shepherding the Farmstead Hotel project forward, and that's not something that just gets approved and happens on its own. We've got to work collaboratively, and Maya and her crew have taken the lead on that. We've asked Maya to undertake the parking study once she and her staff are freed up a little bit from the housing element. So that'll be very important, together with the ability to facilitate appropriate development and redevelopment. So that's a key part of our future, I believe, and that's going to be centered much in the city manager's office, but with right-hand assistance by Maya and her department. So I just want to note that. Also want to note that the city will be bringing on a permanent city manager soon. Very, very exciting. And that'll certainly be important as we move forward in budgeting. Our library services, our police and fire services are essential to the safety of the community and to the quality of life that folks enjoy. The budget reflects the ability to carry those things forward. We could always use more money, of course, to have greater programming and greater levels of service, but we have those covered. I mentioned Mr. Jans earlier, our new Parks and Recreation Director. His department is a small one, but I see great potential there for us to look at the ability to expand programming, to improve facilities, to consider ways to improve our maintenance of facilities. I just have tremendous confidence in Mr. Jans and his energy and ideas to help us. We've spent a lot of time talking about this budget, but our administrative services department is deeply engaged in just the ins and outs of the daily activity of running a city, but also looking at the utility rate study and managing our different funding sources that are out there. And they're certainly going to be up to their elbows, if not their ears, in the long-range financial plan that we're talking about. Very exciting stuff. I also want to mention that we have a commitment to environmental sustainability. So it's one of the City Council's goals. There are funds in the draft budget that will help us move forward with climate action. We've got a number of initiatives that Priya Nixon from my office is heading up. But we have funding to allow us to engage with the county and with others to advance climate action. Communication strategy is something that we do, but we need to expand that. I would see that will be an initiative that our new city manager will undertake together with you all in order to get just information out, all the things we've been talking about, to inform the community and to solicit from the community their thoughts and their desires. I don't want to leave without the hopeful thought around Measure L, which is the countywide fire prevention measure, as well as our own local Measure H. Those are examples of ways to address needs that the community has identified, and if those are supported by the community, will bring funding very much to us. The last thing is around labor costs. Those are dollars, but more importantly, those dollars go to people, the staff, up and down the line, from our maintenance folks to police people, librarians, planners, everybody on staff. They've done a terrific job for the community over recent years. The budget includes funds so that we can address cost of living needs, salary adjustments. We've not been in the position in recent years to do that, but the City Council has made clear that you wish to do that. We're in the process of conversations with our employees, labor unions, to address that, and that'll be coming forward in future. But that is included in our considerations and in the base budget that you see. So we've got funds that we think are important to address staffing needs and to compensate staff appropriately. So I just want to touch on those things because they're kind of outside of the main event or the main focus, which many times becomes infrastructure, super important, but all of the other functions of our small local government are important to remember too. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm going to open it for public comment in a moment. I first want to ask Dr. Mitz, in terms of dates, timeline, et cetera, for the budget coming forward, could you remind us of those dates?
So we're scheduling that we would bring the budget forward for adoption at the first meeting in June. So it'd be June 14th. And included in the budget adoption will also be the adoption of the 5-year CIP. We do have to have an adopted budget by June 30th. And so we usually give one extra meeting as a little playtime just in case there's any significant changes. But based on the discussion today, it does not. I'm not getting indication that there are any significant changes. So we would move forward on bringing that for adoption at the next regular meeting.
And then, as we had done in the past with some potential buyback options, will that be put forward as well this year?
Yes, that will be put forward as well. Typically, we'll bring the add back list after we received the information from the county on what our actual property tax is. We usually receive that anywhere from mid to late August. Additionally, by that time, we'll have a better idea of where our sales tax is going to be coming in for the end of this current fiscal year. The CDTFA has changed the way that they distribute sales tax. So both ourselves as well as Avenue and every other city is trying to figure out their methodology. In the past, you'd get essentially your like January, February, you get what the estimates are. In March, so the third month of every quarter, you would get your actuals plus a true up. Before, they were pretty consistent. What we found is CDTFA changed their methodology. It was right at the beginning of COVID. So unfortunately, with the COVID effects and the change in methodology, it was really hard to kind of track it down. But we're getting closer and closer. So now we're finding our payments that we receive for the first 2 months of the quarter are much less than what we typically did, but our true up is much more significant. So so we're still trying to get used to that. But by the time we get to the first quarter update, which would be in September, we'll have a better idea of where we're actually tracking and see what adjustments we can make and what portions of the add back list we can bring back to council.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm seeing Councilmember Hall, and then I do want to open to public comment.
Thank you, Dr. Mitz. In addition to just the add back, it might be helpful to include a list of smaller CIPs, if it makes sense. In talking with Mr. Rincon, here's a list of things that could be funded as well from the general fund right now today, if we're ready to go on that list of things. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. I'll make it quick. I just wanted to give a quick update at our Napa County Climate Action Committee. We all voted unanimously to take a regional approach to doing a climate action plan. So there will be costs associated with that. And we asked to have those as quick as possible, knowing that we're all going through the budgeting process, but we didn't get those costs yet. I just want to let everybody know that those are coming.
Thank you. And so with that, I will open to public comment and see if we have public comment at this point.
There are no hands raised.
No hands raised. Okay, we'll bring it back to the council. I want to support the idea of looking at that CIP list to see if there's some mid-range cost projects that we can move forward with. Looking at things like safety issues with roads, paving, also water protection, fire protection. If there are some things that we can put some funding into that we can all agree is a worthwhile investment at this point on those aspects, critical aspects, but that will fall within reason, within our balance. I would support the idea of looking at those. So with that, are there any additional council comments? Any input from staff here, from our city manager, Dr. Mitz?
I do just want to say,
Go ahead, April.
I think we're going the same line. I just want to say thank you for all of the help, in the budget development. Council has set some good policy discussions, policy items in place, as well as the goals in the work plan. So we do appreciate that. All the department heads, unfortunately, we had to make cuts. It was not an easy budget process. So I appreciate everybody just willing to just kind of make the sacrifices we needed to make in order to make sure we have a balanced budget. Again, Mandy Kellogg, for the insane amount of hours that she has put in getting this, we got this all together in 22 pages, but it's really, I can't even express how much work goes into it on the back end to make it sound so calm. So I do appreciate that. And I appreciate the guidance of City Manager McCann going through this process with him this year. It was always fun and exciting. And I do thank you for his guidance in us putting this together. So those are my final comments.
Thank you. And certainly want to echo the gratitude to Ms. Kellogg and to you, Dr. Mitz, and to Mr. McCann for pulling this all together and getting it in front of us. Really appreciate it, all the work. And thanks staff for the focus on their budgets as we move forward. So we'll be circling back June 14th on this. And I'm seeing City Manager McCann and Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I just want to second what April said. Just lots of thanks to the council and to staff. I also wanted to thank our city clerk, Cindy, for all of her work, just the help she's given me over the few months I've been here. I really appreciate that. But also with respect to this particular packet, and actually all of our packets, just getting those things out. It's a lot of work, and I've thanked April and Mandy for their work on the budget, but pulling that all together so that we could have these conversations without really any hiccups. Very, very seamless. She is very professional at what she does, and I really appreciate that, and it's reflected in today's conversation. So thank you, Cindy.
Yes, thank you as well, Cindy. Seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo the same points. Thank you, staff, Mandy, April, everybody else who's contributed to the effort. I think it's been terrific, especially like the fact that there are some new tools in front of the council, which I know first time through are hard to put together, difficult to gather it up and get it organized. All of that's very, very helpful. And I know that we will be engaging in this long-range financial plan going forward. So many of these tools require constant updating, how to keep them fresh. And as an organization, we're in the habit right now of not doing that because we've said we're in a persistent state of crisis. And so we've just left any idea that we have, any dream about the programs we want to deliver to the community stuffed in our desk drawers. And I think it'd be really good for all of us to go through those desk drawers, get those ideas out, get them on your list, get them on a master list. It doesn't mean they're all going to get done, but the only way this council can help you, can help garner the resources you need to deliver those dream programs is to get it in front of us and allow us to see we're only delivering the top 5% of this list. And it's a very, very long list of needs that the community has. And so let's do a better job if we can, getting stuff out of our desk drawers onto a master list, and then helping the council get into a routine of prioritizing that list. So anyway, I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you. Thank you again for everything today.
Thank you. You know, I want to respect Councilmember Hall's comments about how we want to move forward. I would disagree just a bit in terms of dreams, ideas being stuffed into desk drawers. I think everybody's been maintaining as well as they've been able. We've been under, significant challenges the last few years. I do agree that we've had to reprioritize, and now maybe the time to bring out some of those other prioritized. But I just want to make sure that staff and council, everybody feels appreciated for the efforts that have been put forward over the last number of years. I just want to make sure we're balancing our comments that way. So with that, appreciate everybody's input, everybody's thoughts here, and we'll circle back on the budget items on the 14th and input to staff as we go forward. I'm sure council will have some input in the coming weeks. So thank you very much.
I think that means we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye.